15. Things you never knew about Humphrey Bogart. From a Christmas baby modeled for baby food ads to a tough guy who was stabbed by his wife, Humphrey Bogart's real life was more dramatic than any script. This Hollywood legend fought leeches in the Congo, protested government blacklists, and had his name become a verbal while hiding a secret that would shock his fans. Here are 15 things you never knew about Humphrey Bogart. Fact 1. Christmas baby food model. Here's a gift that keeps on giving. Humphrey Bogart entered the world on Christmas Day, 1899, which might explain why he became such a present to Hollywood fans everywhere. Born in New York City to parents who couldn't have been more different from the tough guys he'd later play on screen, little Humphrey came from serious money and high society connections. His mother, Maud Humphrey, wasn't just any ordinary parent. She was one of the most successful commercial illustrators of her time, making what would be equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today, drawing pictures for major brands and children's books. She had a particular talent for capturing the innocence and charm of childhood, which made her the go-to artist for companies wanting to sell products to families across America. When baby Humphrey came along, Maud saw the perfect model right in her own nursery. She used her adorable son as the face for Mellon's baby food advertisements, creating images that would be seen by millions of families shopping for infant nutrition. These weren't just quick sketches either. Maud's illustrations were detailed, professional artwork that helped sell countless jars of baby food across the country. This connection between Bogart and baby food advertising led to one of the most persistent myths in Hollywood history. For decades, people believed that Humphrey Bogart was actually the famous Gerber baby, the chubby-cheeked infant whose face has appeared on Gerber products since 1928. The rumor made perfect sense to people after all. If his mother was a commercial illustrator who used him for baby food ads, why wouldn't she have created the most famous baby food image of all time? The truth is much simpler and actually more interesting. Maud Humphrey never worked for Gerber at all. And the timing doesn't add up anyway. When the Gerber baby illustration first appeared, Bogart was already pushing 30 years old and well into his struggling actor phase. The real Gerber baby wasn't revealed until 1978, when it turned out to be Ann Turner Smith, a woman from Florida who had no connection to Hollywood whatsoever. But the Mellon's baby food connection was completely real, making Bogart one of the earliest celebrity endorsers in advertising history, even if he was too young to know it at the time. Fact 2. Father's secret opium addiction. Behind the respectable facade of the Bogart family's Upper West Side mansion lurked secrets that would have shocked New York's high society if they had ever come to light. Dr. Belmont DeForest Bogart appeared to have everything going for him. He was a highly respected cardiopulmonary surgeon who had built a thriving medical practice and could afford to give his family all the luxuries that money could buy in turn-of-the-century Manhattan. What his patients and colleagues didn't know was that Dr. Bogart had developed a serious addiction to opium, a drug that was surprisingly common among medical professionals of that era who had easy access to powerful painkillers and narcotics. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, opium addiction wasn't uncommon among doctors who initially used the drug to treat their own ailments or cope with the stress of their demanding careers, only to find themselves trapped by its addictive properties. The addiction created a terrible cycle in the Bogart household that young Humphrey witnessed day after day. Dr. Bogart's drug use made him unpredictable and volatile, which put enormous strain on his marriage to Maud, who was dealing with her own struggles with alcohol. The combination of his opium addiction and her drinking problem created a toxic environment where arguments and fights were a regular occurrence, shattering any illusion of the perfect upper-class family they appeared to be from the outside. Maud Humphrey Bogart, despite her professional success and artistic talent, found herself increasingly unable to cope with her husband's addiction and the chaos it brought to their home. She turned to alcohol as her escape, which only made the situation worse and created even more tension between the couple. Their fights became legendary among those who knew them, with shouting matches that could be heard throughout their elegant home, and sometimes spilling over into public settings. This dysfunctional family dynamic had a profound impact on young Humphrey, who grew up watching his parents destroy each other through their respective addictions. The constant fighting and unpredictable behavior from both parents created an unstable childhood that was far removed from the privileged life it appeared to be on paper, helping to shape the complex, sometimes difficult personality that would later make Bogart such a compelling and authentic actor on screen. Fact 3. Expelled for throwing headmaster in pond. The most colorful story about Humphrey Bogart's brief and disastrous time at Phillips Academy involves a dramatic confrontation that supposedly ended with the future movie star grabbing his headmaster and hurling him directly into the school's famous rabbit pond. But the truth behind his expulsion is probably much more complicated and far less exciting than the legend suggests. Bogart arrived at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, in September of 1917, following in the footsteps of his father, who had attended the prestigious boarding school decades earlier. Dr. Bogart had high hopes that his son would straighten out his academic performance and behavior problems that had already surfaced during his earlier schooling in Manhattan, but Phillips Academy proved to be an even worse fit for young Humphrey than his previous schools had been. From the very beginning, Bogart struggled with everything the elite boarding school demanded of its students. His grades were absolutely terrible, with one headmaster writing that Bogart doesn't even try to maintain a gentleman's C average, which was considered the bare minimum acceptable performance for students at the school. Beyond his academic failures, Bogart was caught drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes on campus repeatedly, both serious violations of the strict rules that governed student behavior at Phillips Academy. The pond-throwing incident has become the stuff of Hollywood legend, with various versions of the story circulating for decades after Bogart became famous. According to the most popular version, Bogart got into a heated argument with his dorm headmaster late one night, and things escalated to the point where the young troublemaker physically grabbed the authority figure and tossed him into the cold water of Rabbit Pond, which was a well-known landmark on the school's campus. However, other accounts suggest that Bogart's expulsion was the result of a different kind of physical altercation that happened when he was caught sneaking back into his dormitory after curfew. In this version of events, the headmaster confronted Bogart as he was climbing through a window, leading to a scuffle that resulted in both the rule-breaking and the physical confrontation that finally convinced school officials they'd had enough of their problem students' behavior. Regardless of which version is true, Bogart's time at Phillips Academy came to an abrupt end, and his dreams of following his father to Yale University died along with his boarding school career. Fact 4. Multiple scar origin stories. The distinctive scar on Humphrey Bogart's upper lip became one of his most recognizable features as an actor, but the true story of how he got it remains one of Hollywood's most confusing mysteries, with at least 3 completely different versions circulating over the years, and none of them definitively proven to be the real truth. The most widely accepted account places the incident during Bogart's service in the United States Navy, when he was working aboard the USS Leviathan during World War I. According to this version, Bogart was assigned to escort a naval prisoner who was being transferred from one location to another, a routine duty that should have been completely uneventful for the young sailor who was still learning the ropes of military service. The prisoner, who was reportedly being moved for disciplinary reasons, seemed calm and cooperative as Bogart led him along the ship's deck. At some point during the escort, the man politely asked Bogart if he could have a cigarette, which seemed like a reasonable request that the young sailor was willing to grant. However, the moment Bogart reached for his cigarettes and let his guard down, the prisoner saw his opportunity to make a desperate escape attempt. Without warning, the man swung his handcuffed wrists like a weapon and struck Bogart directly across the face with the metal restraints, splitting his upper lip open and sending him reeling backward from the sudden attack. The prisoner then took off running across the ship's deck, leaving Bogart bleeding and stunned from the unexpected violence of the assault. However, this naval story competes with at least 2 other explanations that have been offered over the years. Hollywood studios later promoted a more dramatic version that claimed Bogart's ship was attacked by enemy forces during the war, and he was wounded in the heroic defense of his vessel. This story was almost certainly invented by publicity departments who thought it sounded more exciting and patriotic than a simple prisoner escort gone wrong. A third version suggests that Bogart got the scar in a completely different kind of fight or accident that had nothing to do with his military service at all. The conflicting accounts have never been fully resolved, leaving the true origin of one of cinema's most famous facial features permanently shrouded in uncertainty and competing legends. Fact 5. Worst screenwriter ever. When Humphrey Bogart returned from his Navy service in 1919, he found himself completely lost about what to do with his life. And like many young men with big dreams and limited skills, he decided to try his hand at writing for the movies. During Hollywood's early boom years, when the film industry was still figuring out how to tell stories on screen, Bogart managed to land a job at the film studio owned by William A. Brady, who happened to be the father of one of Humphrey's childhood friends from his privileged Manhattan upbringing. This connection got him in the door as a low-level office worker, but Bogart had much bigger ambitions than filing papers and running errands for the busy executives who were trying to build their entertainment empire in the rapidly growing movie business. Convinced that he had a natural talent for storytelling, Bogart spent his spare time working on what he believed would be his breakthrough screenplay that would launch him into a successful career as a Hollywood writer. He poured his heart and creative energy into crafting what he thought was a compelling story, with interesting characters and dramatic situations that would translate perfectly to the silver screen and make audiences fall in love with his vision. When Bogart finally finished his script and submitted it to the studio's professional script readers, he was confident that his work would impress the experts and open doors to bigger opportunities in the entertainment industry. Instead, he received one of the most brutal rejections in Hollywood history, when the script reader delivered a devastating assessment that completely destroyed his screenwriting dreams. The professional reader, whose job it was to evaluate dozens of scripts every week from hopeful writers across the country, told Bogart in no uncertain terms that his screenplay was just about the worst thing that he had ever seen in his entire career. This wasn't just a polite rejection or constructive criticism about minor problems that could be fixed with some editing and revision work. It was a complete demolition of Bogart's writing abilities that made it clear he had no future whatsoever as a screenwriter. The harsh but honest feedback forced Bogart to completely abandon his dreams of becoming a writer and look for other ways to make his mark in the entertainment world, eventually leading him to try acting instead, a career change that would ultimately make him one of the most iconic movie stars in Hollywood history. Fact 6. First actor to say tennis. Anyone? Long before Humphrey Bogart became famous for playing tough guys and hard-boiled detectives, he was stuck performing in lighthearted Broadway romantic comedies where he was constantly typecast as wealthy, privileged young men who spent their time at country clubs and fancy social gatherings, and it was during one of these early theatrical performances that he reportedly became the first actor in history to speak what would later become one of the most overused and mocked lines in all of entertainment. The phrase, "Tennis, anyone?" has become such a tired cliché that it's practically a joke among actors and theater fans today, representing everything that people find annoying about shallow, upper-class characters who have nothing more important to worry about than their next recreational activity. However, when Bogart first uttered these words on a Broadway stage sometime in the early 1920s, the line was completely fresh and original, written by a playwright who thought it was a perfectly natural thing for a wealthy character to say. Bogart's early acting career was nothing like the roles that would eventually make him a Hollywood legend. Instead of playing criminals, private investigators, or world-weary anti-heroes, he was cast again and again as clean-cut romantic leads in drawing-room comedies that were designed to entertain audiences who wanted to escape into a world of wealth, leisure, and social sophistication that most people could only dream about experiencing in real life. These types of plays were extremely popular during the 1920s, when American audiences were fascinated by stories about rich people who lived in beautiful mansions, wore expensive clothes, and had the luxury of spending their days playing sports and attending parties, instead of working regular jobs like everyone else in the country. The tennis line fit perfectly into this fantasy world, representing the kind of casual, carefree lifestyle that theatergoers found both entertaining and enviable. When Bogart delivered the line, he was simply doing his job as a professional actor, following the script and bringing his character to life without any idea that he was creating a piece of dialogue that would be repeated, parodied, and mocked for decades to come. The fact that this now famous cliché originated with someone who would later become synonymous with gritty, street-smart characters makes it one of the most ironic moments in entertainment history. Fact 7. Spencer Tracy gave him his nickname. The nickname that would become inseparable from Humphrey Bogart's identity for the rest of his life didn't come from his family, his childhood friends, or even his own creative imagination, but instead was invented on the spot by fellow actor Spencer Tracy during their first meeting on a Hollywood movie set in 1930, when both men were still relatively unknown performers trying to make their mark in the film industry. Bogart and Tracy were both cast in a prison drama called Up the River, which was actually Tracy's very first movie role and one of Bogart's earliest attempts at breaking into the movie business after years of struggling on Broadway stages in New York City. The film was being directed by John Ford, who would later become one of Hollywood's most celebrated filmmakers, though at the time he was still building his reputation as someone who could handle both action sequences and character development. When the two actors first met on set, Bogart tried to be friendly and casual by introducing himself with what he thought was a perfectly acceptable shortened version of his first name. Walking up to Tracy with the kind of confidence that came from his upper-class Manhattan background, Bogart extended his hand and said something along the lines of, "Hello, call me Hump," using the nickname that people in his social circle had been using for years without any problems or complaints. Tracy, who had a much more working-class background and a completely different sense of what sounded natural or appropriate, immediately reacted with surprise and perhaps a little bit of amusement at what struck him as a rather odd way for someone to introduce themselves. Without missing a beat, Tracy looked at his new co-star and replied, "What kind of nickname is that?" "From now on and henceforth forevermore you'll be known as Bogey." The suggestion caught on immediately among the cast and crew, and Bogart himself seemed to like the new moniker much better than his previous nickname. Tracy's spontaneous rechristening of his fellow actor turned out to be one of those perfect moments where the right person suggests the right name at exactly the right time, creating a piece of Hollywood history that would stick with Bogart for his entire career and beyond, becoming as famous as any character he ever played on screen. Fact 8. Third wife stabbed him. Humphrey Bogart's third marriage to actress Mayo Methot was so explosively violent and unpredictable that Hollywood gossip columnists nicknamed them the Battling Bogarts. But even that dramatic label barely captured the true intensity of their relationship, which included physical attacks that would have landed most people in jail if they hadn't been famous movie stars with studio contracts to protect. Mayo Methot was a successful stage and film actress in her own right when she married Bogart in 1938, but she was also known throughout the entertainment industry for having a serious drinking problem and a volcanic temper that could erupt without warning over the smallest disagreements or imagined slights. The combination of her alcohol abuse and jealous personality created a toxic situation that became even worse when mixed with Bogart's own heavy drinking and his growing fame as a leading man in major Hollywood productions. The most shocking incident in their turbulent marriage occurred when Methot became convinced that Bogart was having an affair with another woman, though the details of what triggered her rage have never been fully explained or verified by reliable sources. During one of their heated arguments, Methot completely lost control of herself and grabbed a kitchen knife, then attacked Bogart from behind and actually stabbed him in the back, creating a wound that required medical attention but wasn't serious enough to be life-threatening. What made this incident even more remarkable was that Bogart refused to call the police or press charges against his wife, largely because his studio contract contained a strict morality clause that could have been used to terminate his employment if news of the domestic violence became public knowledge. Instead, he quietly sought medical treatment, and had the wound patched up while keeping the entire incident as secret as possible from reporters and studio executives. The stabbing was just one of many dangerous episodes in their marriage, which also included the time Method set fire to their house during another drunken argument, and a separate occasion when she threatened to shoot Bogart with a gun during a party they were hosting for other Hollywood celebrities. Their relationship became so notorious for its violent outbursts that other actors and industry professionals began avoiding social events where both Bogarts would be present, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire of their explosive fights. Fact 9. Hated Ingrid Bergman despite Casablanca. One of the most shocking secrets in Hollywood history is that the two stars of Casablanca, widely considered one of the greatest romantic films ever made, actually couldn't stand each other in real life and had to use all of their professional acting skills to create the legendary on-screen chemistry that has captivated audiences for more than 80 years. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman's performances as Rick Blaine and Ilsa Lund created some of the most memorable romantic moments in cinema history, with their passionate scenes together convincing millions of moviegoers that they were watching two people who were genuinely attracted to each other and deeply in love. The famous airport goodbye scene, where Rick tells Ilsa, "Here's looking at you, kid," has become one of the most quoted lines in movie history and helped establish Casablanca as the ultimate romantic drama. However, behind the cameras, the reality was completely different from what audiences saw on screen. Bogart and Bergman had fundamentally different personalities and approaches to their craft that created constant friction during the filming process in 1942. Bogart was known for his casual, somewhat cynical attitude toward the movie business, while Bergman took her work much more seriously and had very specific ideas about how scenes should be performed and what emotions her characters should convey. Their personality clash became so obvious to people working on the film that crew members and other actors could sense the tension whenever Bogart and Bergman had to work together in the same scenes. The professional animosity was apparently mutual, with neither actor making any effort to develop a friendship or even basic rapport with their co-star outside of what was absolutely necessary for their performances. The truth about their relationship remained largely hidden from the public for decades, but eventually came to light through interviews with people who knew both actors personally. Pia Lindström, one of Ingrid Bergman's daughters, later confirmed the long-suspected reality when she told Bogart's son Stephen that his mother didn't really get on with your father. Isabella Rossellini, another of Bergman's daughters, was even more direct about the situation, stating flatly that they weren't even friends and had no relationship whatsoever beyond their professional obligations to the film. Fact 10. Related to Princess Diana. In one of the most unlikely family connections in history, Humphrey Bogart shared a bloodline with Princess Diana of Wales, making the tough-talking Hollywood actor and the beloved British royal ninth cousins through a family tree that stretches back more than 3 centuries to the earliest days of American colonial settlement. This remarkable genealogical connection was discovered by researchers who spent years tracing both family histories back through multiple generations of marriages, births, and migrations that eventually led to a common ancestor who lived during the 1600s. The shared relative was Thomas Woodford, an English colonist who made the dangerous journey across the Atlantic Ocean aboard the famous Mayflower ship in 1620, along with the other pilgrims who established some of the first permanent European settlements in what would eventually become the United States of America. Thomas Woodford was part of that historic group of religious separatists who left England seeking freedom to practice their faith without interference from the established church, and his decision to risk everything for a new life in the unknown wilderness of North America would have consequences that nobody could have predicted at the time. After arriving in the New World, Woodford married and started a family that would grow and spread across the American colonies over the following centuries, with some of his descendants eventually making their way back across the ocean to England. The genealogical path from Thomas Woodford to Humphrey Bogart runs through Bogart's mother's side of the family, connecting the Hollywood star to some of the most prestigious bloodlines in early American history. Maud Humphrey Bogart came from old colonial stock that could trace its roots back to the Mayflower passengers, giving her son a legitimate claim to membership in organizations like the Mayflower Society that are reserved for people who can prove their descent from the original Pilgrims. Meanwhile, the connection from Thomas Woodford to Princess Diana follows a completely different branch of the family tree that eventually made its way back to England, where various marriages and relationships over the centuries created the noble lineage that would ultimately produce the Spencer family and their most famous daughter. The fact that these two vastly different family lines would produce both a gritty American movie star and a British princess demonstrates just how interconnected aristocratic and colonial families really were across the Atlantic world. Fact 11. Rat Pack's spiritual leader. The legendary Hollywood social group known as the Rat Pack had a surprisingly organized structure with specific titles and roles for each member. And while most people know that Frank Sinatra was officially designated as the Packmaster who ran the group's activities, fewer people realize that Humphrey Bogart held the equally important position of spiritual leader, who provided guidance and wisdom to the famous collection of entertainers. The Rat Pack began as an informal gathering of Hollywood celebrities who enjoyed drinking, partying, and socializing together during the 1950s, when the entertainment industry was at its glamorous peak and movie stars had both the money and the freedom to live extravagant lifestyles that ordinary people could only dream about. The core members included Bogart, Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and several other performers who were all at the top of their respective careers. What started as casual friendships and impromptu get-togethers eventually evolved into a more formal organization with its own coat of arms, official motto, and designated leadership roles that reflected each member's personality and contribution to the group's dynamic. While Sinatra took charge of organizing events and making decisions about where they would go and what they would do, Bogart served as the elder statesman who offered advice and perspective to the younger members. The group's famous name came about during one particularly wild night of drinking and celebration, when the members had pushed their partying to extreme levels that left them looking disheveled and exhausted. Lauren Bacall, who was married to Bogart at the time, walked into the room where they were all sprawled out in various states of intoxication, and immediately delivered the perfect insult that would stick with them forever. Looking at the collection of Hollywood's biggest stars reduced to a messy, drunken state, Bacall shook her head in disgust and declared, "You look like a goddamn rat pack!" Instead of being offended by her harsh assessment, the group immediately embraced the nickname and decided to make it their official title, complete with membership cards and inside jokes that would become part of Hollywood legend. Bogart's role as spiritual leader meant that he was the one other members turned to for advice about their careers, relationships, and personal problems, treating him as a wise mentor figure, despite his own well-documented struggles with alcohol and relationships. Fact 12. Fought leeches for his Oscar. The only Academy Award that Humphrey Bogart ever won in his entire career came at the cost of one of the most physically uncomfortable and disgusting filming experiences in Hollywood history, when he had to spend months in the African wilderness being attacked by blood-sucking parasites while making The African Queen with Katharine Hepburn in the early 1950s. Director John Huston decided that he wanted to film the movie on location in the actual African Congo, rather than recreating the jungle environment on a Hollywood soundstage, which meant that the entire cast and crew had to travel to one of the most remote and dangerous parts of the world to make what would become a classic adventure film about a rough boat captain and a prim missionary traveling down a treacherous river. The decision to film in Africa created incredible challenges that no one had fully anticipated before they arrived in the Congo, and discovered just how hostile the natural environment would be to a movie production. The jungle was filled with deadly diseases, dangerous wildlife, extreme heat and humidity, and countless other hazards that made every day of filming a struggle for survival rather than just another day at work. However, the most persistent and disgusting problem that plagued the production was the overwhelming presence of leeches that infested every body of water in the region and attached themselves to anyone who came into contact with the river where most of the movie's action took place. These blood-sucking parasites were everywhere, and there was no way to avoid them when filming the numerous scenes that required Bogart to wade through the water or work on the boat. According to Bogart's son Stephen, who later shared horror stories about the filming process, his father absolutely hated dealing with the leeches that constantly attached themselves to his body during the water scenes. The film crew actually had to place leeches on Bogart in what Stephen diplomatically described as strategic places for certain shots, while other scenes required the actor to walk through bulrushes that were completely infested with the disgusting creatures. Despite the miserable filming conditions and the constant battle against leeches, Bogart delivered what many critics considered to be his finest performance as Charlie Allnut, the gin-drinking riverboat captain who gradually falls in love with Hepburn's character while they navigate through dangerous enemy territory during World War I. Fact 13. Soft as Shirley Temple. One of Hollywood's biggest secrets was that Humphrey Bogart, the man who became famous for playing ruthless gangsters, cynical private detectives, and world-weary anti-heroes who could handle any dangerous situation with cool confidence, was actually one of the gentlest and most sensitive people in the entire movie industry when the cameras weren't rolling and he didn't have to maintain his tough guy image for the public. This shocking contradiction between Bogart's on-screen persona and his real personality was revealed by James Cagney, another actor who was famous for playing hard-edged criminals and street-smart characters in dozens of Hollywood films during the 1930s and 40s. Cagney worked with Bogart on several occasions and got to know him well enough to see past the carefully constructed public image that studio publicity departments had created to market their valuable star to audiences who wanted to believe in his toughness. According to Cagney, who was known for being honest and direct in his assessments of other actors and industry professionals, Bogart's real personality was completely different from the characters he portrayed in movies like The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, and The Big Sleep. When the director called cut and the filming stopped, Bogart would immediately drop his tough guy act and reveal himself to be a thoughtful, well-educated man who was much more interested in intellectual conversations than physical confrontations. Cagney famously summarized this dramatic personality shift by declaring that when the cameras stopped rolling, Bogart was as tough as Shirley Temple, comparing the supposedly hard-boiled actor to the most famous child star of the era, who was known for her sweet, innocent performances in family-friendly musical comedies that were about as far removed from film noir as it was possible to get. This comparison was particularly striking because Shirley Temple represented everything that was soft, gentle, and non-threatening in American popular culture during the 1930s, making her the perfect contrast to highlight just how different Bogart's real personality was from his screen image. The fact that Cagney chose Temple as his point of comparison suggests that he saw Bogart as someone who was fundamentally kind-hearted and gentle, despite spending his career convincing audiences that he was a dangerous man who shouldn't be crossed. Fact 14. Buried with Lauren Bacall's whistle. When Humphrey Bogart died of esophageal cancer in January 1957, just 2 weeks before what would have been his 57th birthday, he was reportedly laid to rest with one of the most romantic and personal items in Hollywood history, a small golden whistle that carried deep emotional significance for both him and his beloved wife Lauren Bacall. The whistle was a gift that Bacall had given to Bogart years earlier, during the height of their passionate romance that had captivated both Hollywood insiders and movie fans around the world. The precious metal object was engraved with a simple but powerful message that read, "If you need anything, just whistle," which was a direct reference to one of the most famous lines from their first movie together, To Have and Have Not, released in 1944. In that film, Bacall's character delivered the now iconic line to Bogart's character, in a scene that perfectly captured the sexual tension and romantic chemistry between the two actors, who were falling in love both on screen and off camera. The complete quote from the movie was, "You know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow," which became one of the most memorable pieces of dialogue in film history and helped establish both actors as major Hollywood stars. The decision to include this deeply personal gift in Bogart's final resting place demonstrates just how much the whistle meant to him and how important his relationship with Bacall had been throughout the final years of his life. Unlike his previous 3 marriages, which had all ended in divorce and bitter feelings, Bogart's marriage to Bacall was widely considered to be a true love story that brought both actors genuine happiness and stability. The golden whistle served as a permanent symbol of their connection, representing not just their professional collaboration in several successful films, but also their personal bond as husband and wife who had found lasting love despite the challenges and temptations of Hollywood life. By having the whistle buried with him, Bogart ensured that he would carry a piece of their romance with him forever, creating one of the most touching and romantic gestures in entertainment history that perfectly captured the enduring power of their legendary relationship. Fact 15. His name became a verb. Humphrey Bogart achieved something that very few people in history have ever accomplished. His last name became so associated with a specific behavior that it transformed into a common English verb that people still use in everyday conversation more than 60 years after his death. All because of an unusual smoking habit that became part of his signature screen presence. The transformation from proper noun to verb happened because Bogart had a very distinctive way of handling cigarettes that was completely different from how most people smoked during the 1940s and 50s. Instead of lighting up his cigarettes and smoking them normally like other actors and regular people did, Bogart would often place an unlit cigarette at the corner of his mouth and just leave it there without ever actually smoking it, creating a visual trademark that became instantly recognizable to movie audiences around the world. This strange smoking technique meant that Bogart would hold on to the same cigarette for much longer periods than anyone else, keeping it positioned in his mouth while he delivered his lines and performed his scenes, rather than sharing cigarettes with other people, or putting them out after a few puffs like most smokers would do. The habit gave him a casual, slightly rebellious look that perfectly matched his tough guy screen persona and helped make him one of the most distinctive actors of his generation. The linguistic connection between Bogart's cigarette-hogging behavior and the modern meaning of the verb to bogart was first made in a song called "Don't Bogart Me" by a band called Fraternity of Man in 1968. The song used Bogart's name as a verb, meaning to selfishly hold on to something without sharing it, specifically referring to people who would hog marijuana joints during group smoking sessions, instead of passing them around to other people. However, the slang term didn't become widely known until the following year, when the song was featured prominently in the soundtrack of Easy Rider, the famous counterculture motorcycle movie starring Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper. The film's massive popularity with young audiences helped spread the new verb form of Bogart's name throughout American slang, where it quickly evolved to mean hogging or selfishly keeping any kind of object or resource instead of sharing it with others.